Okay, well, just to give you a little bit of background, I am the fifth of seven children, and I was surrounded by mostly girls, and so I ended up taking on the role of referee in my household because I wasn't really involved in a lot of the disputes, and I just wanted peaceful resolutions. And it was funny too. I lived in a small neighborhood, and it seemed like all of the boys my age had a little brother like 2 years younger than them, and they hated each other and they were constantly fighting. And all I ever wanted to do was play ball. And so I found myself mediating disputes since the time I was a little kid. So I've really always been pretty good at that. The thing that I wasn't really skilled at until I joined Toastmasters was on dealing with conflict with me. The other day I was with a district trio and they had a little bit of a dispute, and I got one of these smartphones and you can take pictures with it. So I snapped a quick picture of this trio and I wanted to share it with you guys. Do you ever feel like that? I see some people laughing. Now, which one are you? That's what I want to know. But yeah, conflict can be something that is very disruptive. So what we're going to do today is we're going to try to understand what conflict is and strategies to reduce conflict. So what is conflict? There's a lot of definitions on the internet on what conflict is, and I gave it a lot of thought. And to me, conflict is when two or more people have a negative emotional experience when trying to interact with each other. Right? It may not, sometimes it's people brawling, right? Fighting or doing whatever. Sometimes it's people ignoring each other and not talking to each other or undermining each other. It can be a lot of different things, but what's true about it almost every time is that it's an emotional thing. It's not a logical thing. It's very emotional and it's personal. And what happens is if we're in a state of conflict, it drains us. It drains our batteries. It just takes all our energy away from us. And it changes who we are as a person. Some examples of conflict are disagreements, which we all understand. Sometimes we just dislike people, right? And we can't really put our finger on why, but we don't like them, or we distrust people. And the consequences of conflict is low morale, low self-esteem. You can have there could be physical consequences. We see these mass shooters come in and shoot people up. And then health issues. And then there's also legal and financial implications. If you're in a position where if you don't resolve conflicts, things go bad, it can be bad for your organization. And the other aspect of conflict is it has a tendency to spill over into other aspects of our lives. So if you're experiencing a lot of conflict at work, you bring it home, you go home and you kick your dog, right? And we don't want people to do that because it's not healthy. So the better we are at resolving conflict, the less likely we are to have that spill over into other aspects of our life. What are some common causes of conflict? This is certainly not a complete list, but it's a pretty good list. I think the number one thing is lack of trust. I work in a Scrum environment. I work in quality assurance. And one of the things that we try to do is build high-performing teams that have to work with really difficult problems under extremely stressful situations with a lot of angry people, right? I've worked at places where if our computers go down, we would be losing $10 million of revenue an hour. And that definitely gets people's attention. And it's my team's job to get the computer back up and running and working. And so we have to build high trust teams. It's really important. We have to trust each other at an incredible level. in order to get through that without tearing each other apart. Often it's lack of respect. For one reason or another, we don't respect the people we're working with, or lack of empathy. We can't see the world from the other people's eyes and understand what, maybe they got some underlying problems going on or something going on at home or in some other place. Misaligned goals are pretty common, where we have different people thinking that we're trying to do different things. One of the things we do in the Scrum world is we will poll everybody at the table and say, what do you think our goals are? And we should get one answer, but often every person in the room will give a different answer. And when we get a different answer from everybody in the room, we know that team has problems, right? That they have inherent conflict. And another thing is things like conflicting core values. And what this means is, I'll give you an example of this. I have a friend who last winter, there was a bunch of snow. And so he took a snowblower out, he blew out his sidewalk in front of his house in his driveway. And then he went over and did the neighbor lady's house. And she's an elderly lady and it really has a hard time getting out. And his wife got mad at him because she thought, people should do their own driveways and their own sidewalks. And so there was a conflicting core values. He thought it was a good thing to help other people out. And she didn't. And they didn't talk to each other for 3 months after this, which blows my mind, right? I don't understand why something like that would get people upset, but it was a difference in core values. And another thing is poor communications. Often we don't communicate to each other what it is that we want. Does anybody else have any things that they think are common causes that they'd like to share? Or is it too early in the morning?
Maybe expectations.
Yeah, and I think expectations falls into, it can be misaligned goals, conflicting core values, or poor communications. Did you clearly communicate expectations? And I'll talk more about that later. Anything else?
In the chat, we have a message from Cindy Latch, lack of self-awareness.
Yeah, I'll bring that up.
Misunderstanding what we see and hear.
Yeah. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So the question I got to ask, right? So I was thinking about how to put this presentation together. And most of the stuff on the internet, when you talk about conflict resolution, is somebody that is, and I've done this at work, where I was the mediator. I had 2 people that were in a dispute. I took them into a room and I had to mediate the dispute to keep them from getting fired. And I've been able to do that very successfully. But the question is, for most people, are we the referee or are we the player? And I make a joke here, it's important to know because the uniforms are different. And so the presentation is different depending on which audience I want to talk to. And so I'm going to make the assumption that most of the people here are concerned about conflict in your life, right? Is the conflict I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis and how to reduce it. Now, conflict is a human thing. Well, it's not just human. Every animal in nature deals with conflict. Conflict is part of nature. And some conflict is good. Some conflict is bad. Constant conflict is unhealthy, right? It's just not a good thing for people. Let's move on. So the first thing we want to do is, because conflict is almost always emotional in nature, is we want to diffuse the emotional time bomb. Right? It's a time bomb just waiting to go off. And so one of the things that we need to do is understand that all the emotions we feel emanate from us and not the other person. I was at a top 3 training in Kansas City when I was in district leadership, and Sporty King gave a presentation and he said something that stuck in my head. He goes, when we become angry at another person, It is because they failed to live up to our expectations of them. And then he looked at us and said, have you communicated your expectations to your team? And I felt really bad because it's in all of the instances where I was having issues, it was my response to conflict was to shut down and not communicate. And it's really the wrong answer. So that it was something that was getting me into trouble because I was assuming that the other person was always at fault and it wasn't me. And so I had to think about the problem in a different way. One of those techniques is to see ourselves from the other person's eyes. I won't say it, I use the word opponents, but I don't like that. It's the other person or the other people on the team. How would they, if I were them, if I were in their shoes, looking at me from their shoes, how would I see myself? Would I think, oh, wow, that guy's a really great leader? Or would I think, what a jerk? And unfortunately, more often than I would like to admit, I probably wouldn't look kindly upon myself. And so it's really important for us when we get into a conflict is to try to put ourselves in the other people's shoes and see us from their perspective. And this is something as a manager I have to do quite often, is I know what I would do under almost any condition at work. And I probably overrate my own ability. But when I have people working for me, I have to allow them to be imperfect, to understand that they're going through a growth process. They have their own things going on in their lives. And that I should be there to help them be better rather than to be critical of them for not being as good as me. And so it just to allow the other people imperfection. One of the things to do to try to diffuse emotional time bomb is to find common ground. Find the things that you have in common. And this is not always an easy thing to do. I remember walking with my brother in town. He came out to visit. And so we were walking through town and there's a BLM sign on somebody's lawn and he made a comment about it, which was not good. And I said to him, I said, I have a friend who's a member of BLM and he's a really nice guy, really smart, really nice guy. And if you knew him, I think you'd like him. And my brother said something to the extent of, I'm nothing like them. It's like, well, how do you know that? Right? There are so many things that you have in common with them. You may disagree on something or some things, but I think that if you sat down and you found out what things you agree on more stuff than you disagree on. And so find the stuff that is common. People love their children and want to see a better future for their children. People want to be successful at their jobs, right? Just make the assumption that, when people go to work in the morning, they don't go to work in the morning saying, oh, I'm going to screw up today. I'm going to mess everything up, because they don't. Everybody goes to work every day thinking, I want to do a great job. And so as long as we can look for that common ground that we have, that we all want to be successful, that we all want to do a good job, then that's a good foundation to start building on. And we have to be willing to lose. I don't know if any of you guys are married, but sometimes as a spouse, we're not perfect. And our spouse will get upset at us. And the way my wife responds to that is that she will go quiet and she will go to a different room. And sometimes part of me is just like, I'm upset because she's upset at me. I don't know why she's upset at me, because I don't know what I did wrong, but I'll be upset. But I also realize that if I escalate, right, if I take this to the next level, if I say something harsh to her, it's not going to get better, right? So I have to be willing to lose, right? My goal is to have a good, happy loving relationship with my spouse. And that's the bigger thing. If I have to lose this fight in order to win the war, I'm going to lose the battle, right? Every time. And so we have to be willing sometimes to not be the one that makes the decision or wins the argument, because we need to be focused on the overall goal of the organization and our team. And finally, grow up. Seriously, we need to grow up. And this is a message I send to myself all the time, is when I get upset, I'm acting like a child. I'm acting like a spoiled child, and I just need to grow up and stay focused on what's important. And finally, probably the most important thing, and the tool I use the most, try to have some fun and laugh, right? This is a key when you're dealing with high pressure, high stress stuff, is to constantly stay in a good mood, right? As a leader, that's your job. Sometimes your job is to be head cheerleader. So when things are going rough, don't get pulled down into it. Don't get into the fight. Stay out of the fight, right? Laugh, have fun. Make being part of your team an enjoyable experience. So a good example of this was I was working for a company. We had a software release at night when people were offline for the most part, and things went bad, and they went really bad. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and we called the CIO, or the Chief Information Officer of the company, onto the phone with us to make some decisions on what we were going to do. It was that big of a deal. And we worked until 6 o'clock in the morning and finally got it resolved. And this is people who started working 6 o'clock in the morning before and worked a full 24 hours straight because the release did not go as expected. And we got it fixed. We pulled people in from all over the world, got the problem fixed. We were laughing, and it just really went well. And at the end of it, the CIO goes, "I really like you guys. You're a lot of fun to work with." And we were dealing with just an absolute crisis, but we always had to, throughout the process, and that's just a core value of the team I work with, is to always be, really respectful of each other, always laugh, always have a good time. And if we can play as a good team together, we can do incredible things. If we can't do that, then we're in trouble. If we start sniping at each other or blaming each other, things go bad really fast. So, steps to resolve conflict. Discuss consequences, focus on the goals, develop strategies to overcome obstacles, establish communications protocol, agree on ownership, and celebrate victories. So discussing consequences. And everybody deals with conflict. And I got to ask you as leaders, if you have conflict on your teams or around you, what will happen if you do nothing? Will it fix itself? I see heads going like this. No.
It'll get worse. It'll get a lot worse.
Yes, problems don't fix themselves. That's one of the things I say at work in quality assurance. Problems don't fix themselves. They just grow in the dark. And we have to face them. We have to take them head on, because that's the way to resolve them. So we have to get everybody in the room and ask them this question: how will that affect me in the long run? Right? If we don't do anything, or we let this continue to escalate, what will the impact be on me, right? On you? What will that be if we let this keep getting worse? And the answer is, it doesn't get better for anybody, right? There's nobody that walks away from this clean unless we resolve the issue. And the other question to ask people is, how will that impact how people view me as a leader? right? And you may think, well, I'm just a team member. I'm not really a leader. Everybody's a leader. Everybody's on a team has a time and a place where people have to trust them and look up to them. And that's when you're a leader. You may not be the boss, but you certainly are a leader at different times when needed. That's why you're on the team, right? We expect you. That software release that went bad, the person who found the issue was one of my junior people, sweet little girl that had only been in QA for a couple of years, but she found the problem. And we were reviewing the release, and we were polling everybody and saying, okay, how are things going? How are things going? And she said, I don't know. And I said, what do you mean you don't know? And she goes, I think we have a problem. Okay, describe the problem. So she had leadership. She was the lowest ranking person on the phone call. And yet she was the leader at that time. And she talked about it, discussed it with the team. And we pulled people in, and we discovered that, yes, that's a really, really big problem. And so it was important for her to be concerned how people would view her. What if she had said nothing and then later said, oh, I saw that to talk, right? Would my view of her as a leader be better? No. I would have said, well, you know, do I really want somebody on my team who can't speak up when they have to? So each of us at times is leader, and we have to ask ourselves, when we're in a situation, how would other people view me and how I'm reacting to this? Because that's really important. And ultimately, how will that impact our team's ability to meet our goals? Right? If the conflicts that you're in, and this gets back to the be willing to lose thing, is sometimes I want to win and I want to be the decision maker, but I realize that my team's performance is not going well. And so I need to focus on what our goals are as a team and my team's ability to meet those goals. So my job is not to be the decision maker. It's not to be right. It's to build an effective, high trust team that can do great things. So it's not about me, right? It's about my team. And one of the things that we want to talk about, if we can't get agreement on these things, is what's the worst case scenario? And an example was the thing I mediated at work, where I had two people who had a conflict. And I was told by HR that if this isn't resolved today, they are both going to be fired today. And so I had to sit down with them when we went through this. And I told them, this is the worst case scenario, right? If you cannot come to some sort of consensus today, I will call up HR, they will come in here, and you'll both leave the building and not come back, right? So they understood that. And I want people to understand that is what happens. It doesn't need to be that severe, but what happens if we can't get along? What's the worst case scenario? And it can be bad, right? We don't meet our goals. We hate each other for life. You know, could be legal consequences or financial consequences. There could be all kinds of bad stuff that happens, and we don't want that. None of those things are good, but we need to know what those things are, because that helps us let go of our own preconceptions and our own ego and become part of the team and get focused on the goals. So focus on the goals, right? Fix the problem, not the blame. And I've said before, I work in software quality assurance, and part of my job is to work with all the teams involved when something breaks. And I have to build trust. So when I know these guys are high-paid engineers with master's degrees and PhDs, but they've got fragile egos. And so if I immediately said, you broke something, or you did something wrong, or you screwed up, they would shut down. And I need them. I need their help to solve the problem. And so one of the things that we do is we're very, very careful not to blame people. We state what the problem is. I like to say is we draw a circle around the problem, right? This is the problem inside of this circle. Anything outside the problem is not the problem. And then we describe the problem. And then we ask for their help in solving the problem. So we really focus on the problem at hand and not who's to blame for what went wrong. That's somebody else's job to figure out. But here's the thing, if we fix the problem, nobody's going to be out there trying to figure out who to blame. If we don't fix the problem, somebody's in trouble. And it could be me, it could be anybody. Who knows who they're going to blame? Develop agreement on what our goal should be. So this gets back to the miscommunication, the differing expectation, misaligned expectations. Do we know what our goals are? And that's sitting down with people and getting consensus on what the outcome looks like. And it's not sitting up in the front of the room. I've literally seen this at district meetings where the district governor literally sat in a chair by himself in the front of the room and told everybody what their goals were. And I just shook my head going, oh, this is not going to work. This is going to be problems. And I was right. They had a lot of issues because it was, he didn't care what anybody else thought. And he told them he didn't care, right? These are the things we're going to do. You're going to do it my way or you're going to be out. And it didn't really create a good team environment. So it's really important to build agreement, consensus on what the goals is, and it needs to be negotiated, right? Everybody's voice needs to be heard, and they all need to be contributors, and they all need to own part of it, right? I've studied General Patton, who was a World War II general, one of the best generals in history. And it was written by one of his commanders that had worked with him for 20 years. And the commander said something that sort of blew my mind. He said in the entire time he worked with Patton, he never heard Patton give a direct order.
Whoa.
He said what he would do was he would ask people, what is it that we need to do? Right? We need to beat the Germans. What do we need to do? And then his people would talk about different strategies and what they would do. And then he would ask them, do you really think we could do that? Do you have the resources to do that? Do you think your men are equipped and trained well enough to do that? Do you think you can do that in 3 days? And then once he got them to agree on these questions, like 7 or 8 questions in a row, then he would say, okay, go, get it done, right? But they owned it. They owned the outcome. He never took ownership of the work. They had committed over and over and over again that they had the people, the resources, the morale, everything that they needed to get the job done. And they said, go get it done. And then communicate. It's a huge thing. One of the places that I've seen conflict come from was breakdowns in communication. So one of the things that happens when communication breaks down is that conflict escalates, right? I get angry, I stop talking. And then if our goals were divergent before, they become more divergent because we're not communicating, we're not pulling our goals together anymore. We're not pulling our expectations together anymore because we've stopped communicating. And so we need to communicate, and we need to trust each other. Any effective team is built on a foundation of trust. And I just can't say that enough, is trust is everything. Okay, developing strategies to overcome obstacles. When obstacles are encountered, how do we work through them? So as a manager on a team, and I was responsible for the quality of 25 different development teams. It was a big program. And I found I spent almost all of my time dealing, well, number one, quality assurance, I dealt with problems all the time, but it was trying to establish what our process for communication was. and how we would overcome obstacles. So when something broke, how do we escalate that? How do we fix that? How do we measure that? And a lot of it is, how do we maintain respect for each other? Is if we don't respect each other, and again, it's fix the problem, not the blame. Is I respect you as a professional. I don't understand what you do, right? Or what your job is, or I don't know every detail of everything that has happening in your life right now. But if I have respect for you and trust you, then I can let you go do your thing, and we're good to go. As long as our goals are aligned, we're fine. And it's degree on how to do and how to measure. So how are you going to go solve the problem, and how do we measure success? So if you say you're going to do something, and this is tough, especially when things break, is what are we going to do to fix the problem, and how do we know it's been fixed? Because sometimes people says, hey, I'm going to go fix it, and off they go. And 2 days later, it's still broken, and everybody's going, what happened? He thought he fixed it, or she thought they fixed it, but they never measured, they never tested it. And so we need to make sure that not only did you fix it in your own mind to what you thought it needed to be fixed, but also to the rest of the team, that the rest of the team says, yes, you're right, it was fixed, right? Whatever the problem was, it's gone away now. Because a lot of times we fix it to our satisfaction, but not to the satisfaction of everybody else on the team. So we need to make sure that not only how are we going to go do this, but how do we measure? How do we make sure that the rest of the team sees it as something that's been resolved? Again, communicate, communicate, communicate. You can't over communicate, and trust each other. Hopefully this stuff makes sense so far. So establishing communications protocol. I found as a manager, I spent an inordinate amount of time researching new communication tools for work, and trying and implementing those, and getting the team to communicate with each other, and also communicating with the people at every level in the organization, because people want to know what's going on and what their money's being spent on and how effective things are. And so communications is a huge thing, but it's something that is often forgotten. People think I can just go do my job. I really want to talk to people. And you can be the best person at your job in the world, but if you can't communicate that to the other people, people will not appreciate your work. So a lot of the times when people don't appreciate what we do, it's our own fault, because we haven't really spent a lot of time trying to figure out how we can communicate our successes, but not only that, obstacles. So one of the things that happens in the development world is that, we'll meet, we'll talk about the work that needs to be done and who's going to do it and when they think it's going to be done. And we'll come back the next day and somebody will say, I wasn't able to solve that problem. I had these other things that came up. Or when I dug into it, I found a technical difficulty that this one-day project now became a 2-week project. Now we don't get angry at them, right? That's why we communicate. We're all adults. We all understand that things are rarely what they seem to be, and that they're often more difficult than we thought they were before we started. And so we need to communicate that information back and forth, and that's so that we understand. But if you just go off in a dark space and disappear for 2 weeks, and when you said you were only going to be gone for a day, then the team will lose their trust in you, because like, what happened to them? And then if you come back in 2 weeks and everybody's angry, and you start saying, well, yeah, but this thing happened and that thing happened. It's like, well, you could have told us that 2 weeks ago, right? Why did you wait 2 weeks for us to get angry before coming back? And now you're angry and everybody's angry, and we don't trust each other. So, establish good communication channels and back channels. It's real common where I work that we have multiple groups that we deal with on a regular basis. And sometimes we'll be dealing with one group and there's some underlying work that has to take place, right? So when I'm talking to people in the business world, I don't want to start talking technical difficulties in the background. because that will spook them, right? It will scare them, but it's a necessary piece of work that has to happen because me and the engineers have to talk about, what's going wrong and what's being tested and what the expectations are, so that I can go back to the business side and say, okay, we'll be done in 3 days. But if the business side saw that back channel communication, they wouldn't understand it, and it would scare them because they would see a lot of problems being discussed. And are you really sure you can get this done in 3 days? Yeah, we're professionals. This is what we do. We're pretty sure that we can get that done. So is establish communication channels for your team, when and how to use them, and then develop some back channels for stuff where if you need to talk to different groups about different things, keep them compartmentalized so that you can focus on different problems instead of having one big channel for everything. Make sure that you have your channels organized in a way it's focused on the work to be done. And establish escalation procedures. This is a place that, again, I work in quality assurance. This is a place where things break bad very often. Everybody's good when everything's going good. But what happens when something breaks? Who do you call? Where do you go? And I've spent a ton of time at work creating documentation on, what do you do when something goes wrong? And the amount of stuff that can go wrong in a business is almost infinite. But what's the process? Who do you go to? How do you come to an agreement on what the next steps are? And in most cases, escalation is to know the right person to go to. And that's where it's when we have the compartmentalizing of responsibilities, as we talked about earlier, this gets easier. But if there's no clear idea who's responsible for a domain of work, then it's really hard to escalate because you don't know who owns it. And part of that ownership, right, is if I throw the ball onto your court, and I don't like to throw the ball onto anybody's court, but if I do throw the ball on your court because this is your domain, you need to take it and you need to work on it, and then you need to get back to it. And that's really important because if I'm sitting there and people are asking me, so what happened to that thing? I don't know. I gave it to the tech guy and the tech guy hasn't contacted me since. And then I try to contact him and I find out he went on vacation and he won't be back for a week. Right. And I've literally had that happen where somebody, as they were walking out the door, pushed some code and they broke the system and they were gone for a week and out of contact. And that created a lot of problems. Right. Don't do that. If you're going to do something, make sure that there's backups and we know who to contact and that there's contingencies, because otherwise, if we don't know where to go when something breaks, then things can break really bad. And what happens is people get angry at each other. You create conflict. And part of that is to trust each other. Right? We have to trust each other. So when I hand the ball to somebody, I need to trust that they will care about it, do their due diligence, and get back to me. And sometimes their answer will be, I'm not going to work on that. Right? I talked to the people involved. They said it's not a big problem. And so we will get to it at some later date, but right now it's not our biggest problem. So we're going to move on, which is, I may not agree with it all the time, but if that's the decision of that group that they're not going to work on it, then I have an answer. When people ask me, I say, well, they made the decision in that group that they did not think was important. So if you want to understand that better, please talk to so-and-so, and he can explain what their thinking is. And so I trust them. I trust them in the way that I don't undermine them. I don't badmouth them. I just say, this is their decision, and I'm leaving their decision. I'm not going to undermine their decision. I'm going to let them be the owners of that. If I undermine it, I take ownership, and I don't want ownership, especially for stuff that is not stuff that I can actually fix. Oh, I think I'm at the end of my presentation. Oh, No, oh no. So agree on ownership. My keyboard screwed up for some reason. So compartmentalize responsibility, right? We sort of do that in district leadership. Is we have club growth, our club growth director, district director, area division directors, different roles, and they have different responsibilities. And it's really important to compartmentalize those, make sure that the people that have those roles take their responsibilities seriously, and that we know that, you know, what things fall into their domain, and respect those lines, right? Is if it's their responsibility, let them own that responsibility. If as a leader, we step over those lines all the time saying, oh, you're the club growth director, but man, you're not making enough phone calls. So I'm going to get on the phone and I'm going to start calling people, right? Well, what you've done is you've undermined them. And then they're just going to stop making phone calls because they're just like, why are you trying to do my job for me? It erodes trust. It's disrespectful. It's a lot of things, right? They may fail, but one of the things is we have to, if we want to see our people grow, we have to risk failure with them. We have to let them try. We're there to support them, mentor, coach them, but we're not there to do their jobs for them. Because if we do their jobs for them, we'll end up doing everybody's jobs. And we will not be good at doing everybody's jobs. That's why we have multiple people. And get commitment on ownership, right? If you're taking the role, let's make sure that we understand what all of your responsibilities are, right? What is your domain of responsibility? And get you to agree on that so that we, not you, but we as a team all know who owns what. So one of the things I did when I was club president of the Waukesha Toastmasters was the first meeting I had with my club leaders, I had every one of them put a speech together to outline their goals for the year and what their values would be. And they all got to give a 7-minute presentation. And it was really awesome because each one communicated to everybody else in the room in a presentation exactly what they were going to do in that coming year. And then I didn't have to do anything, right? I just sat back because they put it out there. They stated it in front of their peers. And then they had that expectation of themselves that they would do this great job that they just told everybody they were going to do. And so that was really nice, was they really talked. Well, and there's also some conversation in the room about, well, should you be doing that or should you be doing this other thing? So there was some alignment that took place during the meeting because everybody stood up and clearly stated what they thought their job was. And it just gave everybody an opportunity to clearly communicate to everybody what they thought their job was, what they thought their job wasn't, where these lines were. And it also gave us as a team an opportunity to make adjustments to make sure that the lines were all in the right place. And so it formed a really highly effective team. And established protocol on crossover issues. Some things don't fit cleanly into one box. Sometimes things span 2 or more teams, in which case you have to establish, what's the process for that? What's the protocol for that? And it can be, let's find an owner for the problem, even though the problem spans multiple teams. And then we'll communicate with all those teams that so-and-so is the owner of this problem. We're going to let them run with it, but they're going to need to work with all these teams. Another example from work is we've had problems at work where I got pulled into calls where I had to fix technical DevOps issues, and I was quality assurance. Right? I'm not a DevOps guy, but I had people on the phone that were from the phone company, from these networking groups, from internal corporate IT, different places, a bunch of people, and I got them on a phone call. And I sat there for 8 hours working on this big network issue. And then after it was all over, I went and asked the program manager, why did you have me do that? I'm quality assurance. This isn't my job. And he goes, yeah, but you're really good at getting people to work together. And we had a big problem to solve. And not one of those teams could solve the problem by themselves. So we needed somebody who could handle these highly technical people and get them to work together to solve the problem. And so, what is your protocol for issues that span multiple teams? And how are you going to get them solved? And a lot of this stuff is just focusing on the problem instead of the emotional aspects of things. Try to remove the emotional aspect. Communicate, and of course, trust each other. Trust is a huge thing. Trust, respect. And finally, the last slide here is recognize the good in others and say it out loud. So the example, my release from hell, where we were up all night and there were all kinds, I mean, just unbelievable. And the next day, I had a stand up with my team. And the girl's name was Maria. And so the way we do stand up is we go through each person and we do a status update. And when it came to Maria's turn, I said, no, I really want to call Maria out here because, there's certain qualities of people on my team that we talk about a lot. And one of those is the courage to speak up, because we're not always the highest ranking people in the room, but we're the goalkeepers, right? We're the last line of defense. And I said, last night on the call, she saw something wrong and she spoke up. So she embodies the values of this team. And so then we went on with our call and we're just pulling through people. And then I heard the sobbing in the background, audible sobbing. This is a conference call. I work with people all over the world, so I don't actually see the people I work with. But I heard this sobbing. I said, Maria, what's the problem? And she goes, I've been working in quality assurance for 10 years and nobody has ever complimented me in 10 years. And it's more common than you think. And I just want people to recognize that as a leader, right? This is a really great way to resolve conflict. Is if you're looking for the good in others, you'll find it. My dad told me that when I was a little kid. If you want to look for what's wrong in others, you will find it. If you want to look for what's good in others, you will find it. What you see in others is your choice. It's your decision. And so look for the good in others. Look for their strengths. Look for their greatness and call it out. Say something about it. Because the one thing I've never had in my entire Toastmasters life is I've never had anybody say, the other day when you said I was really great, oh, I'm really not. Right? That's never happened. Lori's on the call, and she knows that there was a point in time where I asked her to be a presenter at a conference. And Lori didn't believe that she could. And I kept bugging her, emails, phone calls, because I believe she could. I'd seen her present at the club and I thought she would be fantastic. And she didn't. And she finally grudgingly agreed if I promised to sit in the front row, which I did. And she started out 30 seconds shaky and uncertain of herself. And then she just got comfortable and she gave an incredible presentation. And then a couple of days later, I get a card in the mail where she said, "Thank you for believing in me when I did not believe in myself." Right? That's her job as a leader. It's to believe in other people when we still doubt them. Right? It's to believe in the greatness in them and try to bring that greatness out of them. And if you can do that, you build trust, right? You build respect, you build all the things that you need to build in order to have an effective team. You know, it's not about me. It's about my team and the effectiveness of my team. You know, it's not about you, it's about the effectiveness of you as a leader and your team. Are you meeting your goals as a team? Are you effective? Is it an enjoyable, fun experience, right? Are you laughing when you meet? When you see each other in the hallway after not seeing each other for a while, do you feel energized? Right? That's the questions, because that means that you're doing a really good job of leading. And it's important to have fun even while you're stressed, right? Sometimes things don't go as expected, and we need to do something about it. So I got about 8 minutes left. So it's just really important at all times, especially in moments of stress, to keep things light, to keep focused on the problem, focused on making sure that your team is communicating to each other, that they're getting along. If things are breaking, don't ignore it, pay attention to it, and get it working again as fast as possible. And then create some ceremonies when goals are met. Small goals, like I said, was, the next day in the stand-up, first time I got the chance, I recognized one of my employees for embodying our values in front of the rest of the team. And that's hugely powerful to me. There's nothing that will make a person like you more than if you recognize greatness in them. And the thing is, I've just heard from so many people so often that they saw incredible things in people and they never said anything about it. And I just like, wow, what a waste, what a crime. So if you see something incredible in somebody, say something. For goodness sake, say something. It's not going to cost you anything. And you can get so much out of it, right? It can make your team work so much better. So, like I said, create some ceremonies when goals are met. Just make sure the team has a good time, has fun. And understand too that, stress exists, conflict exists. I work with high performance teams. We don't always agree about stuff. I work with engineers. They don't agree about anything. I've seen them sit in the office and disagree for 2 hours, just argue back and forth for 2 hours over something. And then when we get to the end of it, I said, well, how long is it going to take you to fix it? They go, 5 minutes. Why did you argue for 2 hours over something that you can fix in 5 minutes? Well, because they like to argue, right? So they like the back and forth. They don't always agree. But the nice thing about that team that I was working with is even though they disagreed and they would argue about stuff, when they walked out of the room and they had already agreed on what they were going to do, they did what they said they were going to do, right? The rest of the team trusted them. And that was critical to them working together. They didn't need to agree. They just needed to trust. And trust is absolutely the most important thing. So there's a few minutes left. I think we have about 5 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions or comments they want to share?
Andy, if I could.
Yes.
All right. So to bring this home to a club level, and everything that we've talked about today can all be accompanied through the club success plan. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. What I found with coaching clubs, officially and unofficially, is when we take that club success plan seriously. I'm not talking about the finite goals of the DCP. I'm talking about all the important questions that people complain about. But they're important questions because it's how can we get along better? How can we play well together in the sandbox? How are we going to handle conflict? Then you go back to those when there is conflict. What did we agree to? And follow through. So I'm just doing this as a show note to encourage every club to take their club success plan seriously. Don't just take last year's and rubber stamp, that's what we're going to do again. take it seriously, take your time with it.
Yeah,
It's
well,
going to be well worth it.
yeah,
Thank
the
you.
club needs to be focused on serving its members
Right.
and working together as an effective team, right? Meet the club, and we measure it through club goals, but those are just measures, right? We want to make sure that everybody that walks into that room has a positive emotional experience, not a negative emotional experience. And if we're successful at doing that, they will want to be part of the club. If your leadership team, every time everybody walks in the room and they have a positive emotional experience, it feels good, they will want to participate and be part of your team. And I hear this all the time with the teams I work with, is that people that come in from other teams, which happens a lot in the corporate world, they will say that this team is the funnest team to work with. This team has the best communication of any team I've ever worked with. Everybody knows what everybody's supposed to do, and everybody trusts each other. Yeah, because that's what we work on. It doesn't happen by accident, right? We really focus on building trust and improving communication and understanding ownership of different things. And it ends up working really well, but it takes work. It just doesn't happen on its own. And that's your role as a leader, is to build highly effective teams, high trust teams.
Andy, it looks like Eric Young has a question. Eric?
Yeah, thanks for this presentation, Andy. It is really, really great. I was hoping to get a few thoughts on when, how and when can we recognize when it's important to get someone else involved to help resolve a conflict?
Yeah, the question would be, when do you feel like it's out of your control?
Correct, yeah.
And I would actually, and there's people on this phone call that have spent time with me, know that when we even suspect that things are beginning to spin out of control, we will begin communicating with each other. So I'll have peers that I go to, mentors and peers, that say, okay, here's what's going on. Do you have any advice on things that we can do to try to tamp this down? Sometimes they're able to give me advice and I can follow and fix it. Sometimes they provide some gentle intervention. And then there's times where we've had to escalate. So they'll talk about, well, I've had people go to world headquarters for issues. I've served on the disciplinary committee for Toastmasters International. So I know how things can go really, really, really bad. And we don't want stuff to get there. Almost all of these problems can be resolved before then. And there's something I didn't really talk about here, is that there are times where you have to manage somebody off a team or manage somebody out of the organization. Firing somebody is a pretty brutal exercise. I've had to do that. I don't like it, but I don't lose sleep over it, because it's always been something where they were not good for the company, not good for the team. But a lot of times I'm able to manage people off a team by offering them something different to move them into a place where they can be successful, versus letting them continue to fill a role where they're going to fail and they're going to hurt everybody around them in the process. So my recommendation is if you feel things are spinning out of control, start going to the people above you in the organization. Don't badmouth. I mean, just keep it to the facts and ask for advice. And if things do escalate, have them help you escalate the process. They just know who the next person is to go to.
Andy, it looks like we're at 10:10. So we have 15 minutes until our next session on club success. We do have one person who still has a question. If you have a little flexibility, you can answer him. Otherwise, if people need to refill their coffee and get going, that's an option as well. I do want to make sure you have a second to hear. Because thank you so much for your session. Thank you, Andy.
What's the question?
Joseph?
My question is, yes, my question is, I was in retail sales and I made the customers feel important. I felt that was lacking with the team I was working with. They were concerned about what they were doing, and they
Yep.
were not concerned about the customer. And I feel in retail sales, customers are supposed to be important.
Yeah, I know there's been some businesses. So there's the sales model of the salesman working on commission, but there's been some companies that have put sales people on salary and then had them focus on customer satisfaction instead of competing to hit the numbers for monetary gain. And again, it's, you know, how as an organization, if your sales team has gone bad, which is all they care about is the next sale, and they don't care about the customer at all, which can do bad things for your company.